1 second, Officer Denise Harper was calmly answering questions. The next, she pulled a black Glock from under the table and aimed it straight at Judge Malcolm Rivers, and the entire courtroom froze, hearts thundering in their chests. In that breathless silence, no one knew whether justice would survive the next 15 seconds. Fairmont, Missouri, the kind of place that once wore the word quiet like a badge of honor, even though that word had been slipping through its fingers for years. By 8 a.m., the courthouse steps were already crowded. Not just with media vans and reporters elbowing for position, but with townspeople, teachers, nurses, retired factory workers, faces etched with the kind of tired anger that doesn't fade overnight. They weren't there because of some high-profile scandal or celebrity trial. They were there because of what they'd seen. A video that didn't leave room for arguments, a moment that had slammed itself into their small town like a freight train that nobody could stop. Inside courtroom 3C, the air was thicker than the summer humidity. Every bench filled, every aisle watched. The bailiff called order, and then she walked in, Officer Denise Harper. She wore a crisp charcoal suit, her blonde hair tightly pinned back, her badge still clipped to her belt even though regulations said otherwise. Her face was carved from stone, not a single twitch of regret, not a glimmer of apology. She didn't glance at the gallery packed with strangers who used to trust her, used to nod politely at her in grocery stores. She looked straight ahead at the man seated at the bench, Judge Malcolm Rivers, a black man in his late 50s, his posture quiet but unshakable. Rivers didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just watched her come to rest at the defense table, gave the smallest nod, and turned back to the file in front of him. But the weight of the room, the history, the tension, it was so loud you could hear it in the silence. This was supposed to be a simple hearing. But nothing about it felt simple anymore. The case wasn't complicated on its surface. August 9th. A routine traffic stop on Highway 64. Elijah Brooks, 22 years old, college senior, was driving home from visiting his grandfather. A broken taillight, Harper said. A standard stop, she claimed. Yet within 6 minutes, Elijah was face down on the pavement, blood slicking the side of his face, Harper's knee pressed into his back. His only crime was hesitation, asking why, when Harper demanded he exit the car. His body cam footage caught it all, his confusion, his politeness, his fear. His repeated, desperate words, "I didn't do anything." When the video leaked, it didn't ignite political debates or online arguments. It ignited something simpler. People saw it and said, "No. Not this time." Still, Harper pleaded not guilty. Claimed that Elijah's hesitation was aggression, that she feared he might have been reaching for something, that she followed her training to the letter. Her record gleamed with awards, commendations, letters of praise. Buried deeper were the things nobody liked to talk about: 3 prior complaints of excessive force from young Black and Latino men. None sustained. Supervisors wrote them off. Dashcam footage was inconclusive. Procedures within standards. The pattern didn't make it into the public conversation until now. And now, Fairmont had to look itself in the mirror. "You may be seated," Judge Rivers said, his voice even, pulling the room into rigid focus. Prosecutor Valerie Kemp stood first. Mid-50s, a woman whose calm words cut sharper than any outburst. "Your Honor, the people are ready to proceed." The defense followed, their voices slightly thinner. No grand opening statements, no fireworks. Just words that made people in the pews shift in their seats, clench fists against thighs. Harper's attorney insisted, "This case is not about race. It's about perception." Officer Harper acted as she was trained, to respond to potential threats swiftly and decisively. Judge Rivers lifted his gaze briefly over his glasses. "Be careful," he said, low but firm. "Let's not insult the intelligence of this room." A few heads turned. Even Harper blinked. Valerie Kemp stepped forward, a quiet authority trailing behind her. "You will hear from witnesses. You will see the footage. You will hear directly from Mr. Brooks. And at the end, you will not only ask yourselves what Officer Harper did, but why she did it. And who she saw when she looked at him." The jurors, mostly silent until now, leaned forward just slightly. They already knew they weren't just here for facts. They were here for something heavier. Then came Elijah Brooks. He walked slowly, hands tucked into the sleeves of a plain gray sweater, shoulders set but not stiff. As he sat down at the witness stand, there was a moment, small but sharp, when he caught the judge's eye. Rivers gave a small nod. The kind that said, "Take your time. We see you." Valerie Kemp approached, no drama, no raised voice. Just a woman holding a folder and 1,000 people's hopes. "Mr. Brooks, can you tell the court what happened on the morning of August 9th? Elijah cleared his throat. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I was driving back to school from my granddad's house. I just got onto Highway 64 when I saw the lights behind me. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. I didn't know what I'd done wrong." He glanced briefly at Harper, a flicker of something like disbelief, and then continued. "She said my taillight was out. I said okay. I gave her my license and registration. She told me to step out of the car. I asked why. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was scared. I didn't know if I should." "And what happened next?" Kemp asked, stepping back slightly, giving him room to breathe. "She opened my door. I tried to hold it shut, not fighting, just. I didn't know what was happening. She yanked me out. Slammed me down. Cuffed me. My face hit the ground." His words were steady, but his hands trembled slightly on the wooden arms of the chair. "I kept saying I wasn't resisting. I wasn't fighting. I just kept asking why." Valerie nodded, patient. "At any point, did you threaten Officer Harper?" "No, ma'am." "Did you have a weapon?" "No. Just a Gatorade bottle." A soft murmur ran through the gallery before the bailiff barked a sharp order. Valerie pressed a button on the evidence table and the screen behind the judge lit up, a frozen frame from the body cam footage. Elijah, flat against the pavement, blood smearing his cheek, Harper's knee pressed firm into his back. His left hand loose, limp, open. "Is this you, Mr. Brooks?" He swallowed. "Yes." "And how long were you on the ground?" "Felt like forever. Probably 3-4 minutes." Valerie turned off the screen. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. No further questions." The defense attorney approached next. A man in a navy suit with a voice dipped in false sympathy. "Mr. Brooks, is it fair to say you didn't comply immediately when Officer Harper asked you to exit your vehicle?" "I was scared," Elijah said, his voice firmer now. "I didn't understand why. I wasn't refusing. I was confused." "But you didn't comply right away," the lawyer pushed. "I was scared," Elijah repeated. "There's a difference between scared and dangerous." The defense shifted tactics, pointing out statistics about how dangerous traffic stops can be for officers. Elijah didn't deny it. He didn't need to. He just looked at the jury and said, "But being nervous doesn't mean you're a threat. And asking why doesn't mean you deserve to bleed." Somewhere in the gallery, a woman quietly wept into her sleeve. When Elijah stepped down from the stand, it wasn't the words he left behind that filled the room. It was the weight. The kind of weight you can't explain to anyone who wasn't sitting there breathing the same air. But the trial wasn't done. Not yet. Because now it was Officer Denise Harper's turn to testify. She took the stand with military stiffness. Her voice clipped, her words measured. 19 years on the force. Countless commendations. A record of valor. She talked about the fear officers feel, the unpredictability of every stop. But under cross-examination, it began to slip. Valerie Kemp asked, "When you saw Mr. Brooks hesitate, what did you think?" "I thought he was stalling. Maybe hiding something." "Did you see a student? A young man scared and confused?" A pause. Just long enough. I saw defiance," Harper said. And there it was. hanging in the room like a cold wind. Not aggression. Not threat. Defiance. The courtroom felt it in their bones that Harper hadn't been seeing Elijah as a person. She had seen a challenge. The air thickened. The walls seemed to lean closer. The trial was supposed to end in closing arguments. In a verdict. In something resembling order. But no one, not Judge Rivers, not Elijah Brooks, not the people sitting shoulder to shoulder in that packed gallery, was prepared for what was about to happen next. Because Denise Harper was about to show everyone exactly what fear, real fear, looked like when it swallowed you whole. It happened so fast that most people in the courtroom didn't even register the first movement, only the breathless quiet that fell over the room like a sheet. One moment, Officer Denise Harper sat stiff-backed in the witness chair, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap, her eyes staring straight ahead as if she could will herself to hold everything together. The next, her right hand slipped under the table in a movement so small, so casual, that it barely stirred the courtroom's air, but it was enough to catch Judge Malcolm Rivers' eye, enough to make him sit a fraction straighter in his chair, his hands resting lightly atop his bench, no sudden moves, just a slight shift like a ripple against a frozen lake. Before the bailiff could finish a breath, before the jurors could exchange a glance, Denise Harper's hand reappeared, and in it was a black Glock, its barrel steady, its weight unmistakable, its presence a cold punch in the gut that sucked every molecule of air out of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She simply raised the gun and pointed it directly at Judge Rivers, her arm stiff, her finger curled over the trigger in a way that said she had thought about this moment, dreamed it, maybe even convinced herself it made sense. No one moved at first. Not the bailiffs, who hovered at the edges of the room with hands twitching near their holsters. Not the jurors, who sat frozen in place, some with mouths open in silent disbelief. Not the reporters, whose pens dangled uselessly in midair. Only Judge Rivers moved, and even then it was so slight that it could barely be called movement, a slow, deliberate raising of his chin, a steady look that locked onto Harper's eyes like an anchor dropped into a stormy sea. He didn't flinch. He didn't duck. He didn't reach for the panic button hidden under the bench. He just looked at her, and in a voice so even it cut through the tension like a scalpel, he said, "You don't want to do that." Harper's chest heaved, her breathing ragged, her lips trembling around words that had no place to land. Her finger twitched slightly on the trigger but didn't squeeze. She stared at Rivers like he was the sum total of everything that had ever gone wrong in her life, every slight, every fear, every nightmare, all wrapped up in a man who refused to be afraid of her. "You think you know," she said, her voice cracking like ice underfoot. "You think you know what it's like out there, every stop, every hand moving too fast, every second you could die." Her hand wavered slightly but held. "You sit up there in your robe and you judge me like you've been where I've been." Judge Rivers didn't raise his voice. He didn't even lean forward. He just answered with the same calm that had carried him through decades of trials, of verdicts, of staring down the worst the world had to offer. "I'm not judging your fear," he said. "I'm judging your choices. Including this one." There was a flicker, not in Harper's hand, but in her eyes, a flicker that said some part of her, however buried, still heard him. Her breathing hitched, her face crumpling at the edges. "I had seconds," she whispered. "Seconds to decide if I was going home that night." "You had a choice," Rivers said, softer now, so soft the courtroom had to lean forward to catch the words. "And you still do." From the gallery, a voice cut through the thick air, soft, pleading, achingly human. "Denise," it said. A woman stood, hands trembling at her sides. Harper's former partner, a woman whose quiet statement to Internal Affairs had been buried deep in discovery files but read by Rivers in long, heavy silence weeks before. "You're not fixing anything," the woman said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You're just proving him right." For the first time since the gun appeared, Harper's hand shook. A tiny tremor, but enough to make the Glock's barrel waver by a fraction of an inch. Enough for the bailiffs to shift their weight, tensed for a moment that could shatter or heal. Harper's mouth opened and closed, words spilling out in jagged gasps. I gave everything, she said. I gave this city my blood, my time, my life. And now I'm the villain? No, Rivers said, his voice steady as bedrock. You became the villain the moment you stopped seeing people and started seeing threats. The words hit Harper harder than any bullet. Her shoulders sagged, the fight bleeding out of her in slow, painful waves. Her gun lowered an inch. Then another. Until finally it pointed down toward the floor, trembling. One bailiff, moving with the caution of a man approaching a wounded animal, stepped forward. Another followed, hands open and slow. They didn't rush her. They didn't tackle her. They didn't need to. Harper let them take the gun from her hand like it was a weight she couldn't bear a second longer. She didn't fight as they cuffed her wrists behind her back. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just stared at Judge Rivers, her face hollowed out, empty of everything but a sorrow too deep to touch. And the courtroom, the packed, breathless courtroom, didn't move. Didn't cheer. Didn't even exhale. They sat frozen, watching not a takedown but a slow, crumbling fall from grace. Watching not an officer defeated but a system exposed. 15 seconds. That's how long the gun had been raised. 15 seconds that stretched out and cracked open the illusion of control, of safety, of fairness. 15 seconds that showed everyone, in brutal clarity, that fear had been written into the very bones of the system. When the bailiffs led Harper away, no one clapped. No one shouted. They just watched her go, a broken silhouette in a sea of stunned faces. Judge Rivers remained seated behind his bench, his hands resting calmly on the worn wood, his breathing slow and even. He didn't reach for his gavel. He didn't bark orders. He just sat there, absorbing the weight of what had happened. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he leaned forward and spoke, his voice rough around the edges but still firm. This court will recess for 15 minutes, he said. No one leaves. Bailiffs, secure the exits. He stood slowly, not because he was afraid, but because he knew the importance of moving carefully when the world felt like it could shatter at a touch. He walked through the side door without looking back, leaving the courtroom buzzing in hushed, frantic whispers, whispers that couldn't contain the horror, the shock, the bone-deep realization of how close they had all come to something unthinkable. Elijah Brooks sat frozen in his seat, his hands clamped over his mouth, his mother gripping his knee like a lifeline. Across the room, a reporter scribbled furiously, her pen shaking so badly the words came out jagged and slanted. A young juror wiped silent tears from his cheek. Behind the courtroom wall, in a small, sterile conference room, Judge Rivers sat heavily on a wooden bench, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. He wasn't crying. But his breathing was the breathing of a man who had come far too close to something he had spent his life trying to prevent. His clerk knocked once, softly. "Judge," she said, peeking in. Are you all right?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were rimmed red but clear. "I'm fine," he said. Then he shook his head, a tired, broken laugh slipping out. No, I'm not." But he stood anyway. Buttoned his jacket. Straightened his back. And walked back into the courtroom where history had just cracked wide open. Because justice doesn't flinch. Not even when it's staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. The 15-minute recess Judge Malcolm Rivers had called after Denise Harper was disarmed didn't feel like a break, it felt like a holding of breath that no one could quite release. The courtroom didn't empty, not by order, not by choice. People sat frozen, stunned into a kind of silence that vibrated just beneath the surface, hearts pounding too loud in their own ears to speak. Elijah Brooks sat hunched forward, his mother's arm wrapped around his shoulder like she could shield him from the memory of what had just happened, but some things, once seen, couldn't be unseen. Across the aisle, jurors whispered behind trembling hands, reporters scribbled furiously into notepads that shook with adrenaline, and the bailiffs patrolled the edges of the room, every one of them moving a little slower, a little more careful, as if even the air had become fragile. When Judge Rivers returned, his black robe settling around him like armor, the room stood without being told. Not out of protocol, but out of something heavier, something closer to reverence. He sat down, smoothed the papers on the bench with hands that no longer trembled, and leaned slightly into the microphone, his voice gravelly but unwavering. What happened today was not merely a breach of courtroom security, he said, eyes sweeping across the faces before him, jurors, gallery, bailiffs, all of them caught in the net of his gaze. It was a window into a deeper sickness, one that will not be healed by a verdict alone. He paused, letting the words sink in. We witnessed what happens when fear is allowed to root itself so deeply into the heart of an institution that it outweighs judgment, outweighs training, outweighs humanity itself. His voice was a hammer now, slow and deliberate. The defendant, Denise Harper, pointed a weapon at this bench not because she lost her mind in a moment, but because she had long been taught to believe her fear justified anything. Another pause. And she is not alone. No one in the courtroom moved. No one dared to. Rivers continued, softer but deadlier. Elijah Brooks lived through something that millions of others fear every day, not because of anything he did, but because of who he is, and how he was seen in a moment of manufactured danger. He closed the folder in front of him with a quiet finality. This court will not declare a mistrial. This court will not silence the testimony that has already been given. But make no mistake, this trial, as it was, is over. Outside the courthouse, word spread like wildfire. Within hours, the footage, not just the original body cam footage from Elijah's arrest but now the grainy cell phone video of Harper raising her weapon in open court, saturated every screen from local news stations in Missouri to national headlines. Officer snaps at trial. Cop points gun at black judge. Fear on full display. But the headlines couldn't capture the real shock that hung in the air like smoke. Prosecutors moved quickly, filing new charges against Denise Harper, aggravated assault, unlawful use of a weapon, obstruction of justice. Bail was denied. Harper was transferred to a secure holding facility 2 counties over, away from Fairmont's crumbling public trust. Her face, once featured on recruitment brochures and department newsletters, now stared blankly from mugshots that circulated on every news outlet. And yet, for the people of Fairmont, her arrest was only the beginning. They showed up at City Hall the next night, not with torches and pitchforks, but with questions, with anger sharpened into demands. They filled public comment sessions that used to sit half empty, stood 3 deep against the walls of council chambers that had never known such heat. They wanted to know why complaints against Harper had been brushed aside for years, why officers weren't subjected to mandatory psychological evaluations every 5 years, why there was no independent review board with real authority. They didn't want apologies. They wanted action. And slowly, action came. The police chief, who had quietly signed off on every internal memo clearing Harper of wrongdoing, tendered his resignation 3 weeks later. The city council, facing pressure they could no longer ignore, approved a sweeping new budget that funded mandatory body cameras that couldn't be manually deactivated, de-escalation training every 2 years, and, most importantly, the creation of a civilian oversight board with subpoena power and teeth. Fairmont didn't fix itself overnight. But it was no longer pretending it didn't need fixing. Meanwhile, Elijah Brooks tried to find his way back to something like normal. At first, he stayed off campus, living quietly with his mother in a small rental house on the south side of town, his textbooks gathering dust, his friends' texts stacking up unanswered. He said later that it wasn't just fear that kept him away, it was the way people looked at him now, like he was a symbol instead of a person, like he was a walking wound. But slowly, with time, he went back. He didn't return to business school, though. Instead, he changed his major to social work, a decision that surprised some but made perfect sense to those who really knew him. It felt like the right thing to do, he told a local paper months later. I figured if the world's gonna keep breaking people, somebody ought to be there to help them put the pieces back together. Judge Malcolm Rivers never missed a day on the bench after the incident, despite receiving a wave of threats that arrived through every channel, phone calls, letters, shadowed figures loitering too long outside the courthouse. His staff beefed up security, installed silent alarms, rerouted his parking space. But Rivers refused to be rattled. If anything, he seemed steadier, heavier in presence. He gave speeches at local schools, Rotary clubs, bar association lunches, any place that would have him. He never talked about Harper by name. Never about the gun. Instead, he talked about choices. About the way fear warps judgment when left unchecked. About the work it takes to unlearn assumptions bred into a system older than anyone alive today. Justice, he told a packed gymnasium full of high school seniors one afternoon, isn't quoting laws from a book. It's choosing, every single day, to see people before you see threats. It's knowing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to pause. To look again. The jury in Harper's collapsed trial was quietly dismissed without ceremony. No one blamed them. They had seen more than anyone should have been asked to bear. And across Fairmont, the story slowly became not just about Harper's fall, but about the reckoning her fall had forced into the light. There were murals painted downtown, one, a huge portrait of Elijah Brooks, head lifted, eyes steady, next to the words, "See me." There were town halls streamed live online where young black residents, for the first time, felt safe enough to tell their stories to the people who had ignored them for generations. There were debates, arguments, fights, because change never came clean. It came with friction, with tears, with noise. But it came. And in the quiet moments, when the cameras had packed up and the headlines moved on to the next outrage, Fairmont stayed behind, facing itself in the mirror Harper had cracked wide open. Some days were better than others. Some days it felt like nothing would ever be enough. But no one forgot. Not this time. Because justice, they learned, isn't something you catch like a prize at the end of a trial. It's a choice. A fight. A mirror you have to keep holding up to yourself even when you don't like what it shows. And if you were lucky, if you were willing, it was a promise you could keep, not just in moments of triumph, but in the hard, everyday grind of doing better. Choosing better. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Thank you for staying with us through today's powerful story. At first glance, what happened in that Fairmont courtroom seemed like a moment of personal failure, one officer's fear spiraling out of control. But when we look closer, we see it was never just about one moment or one person. It was about a system that allowed fear to grow unchecked, that trained judgment to be replaced by suspicion, that taught those in power to protect themselves first and understand later, if at all. The story of Elijah Brooks reminds us that injustice often doesn't come from loud moments of cruelty, but from quiet moments of misperception, from the small, daily choices to see a person not for who they are, but for what we fear they might be. Elijah didn't fight. He didn't resist. He simply existed, and that was enough to be treated as a threat. It's a reflection many of us don't want to face, but desperately need to. Judge Malcolm Rivers taught us another important truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing steady in the face of fear, choosing humanity over reflex, principle over panic. His refusal to flinch wasn't just a moment of personal bravery, it was a reminder to all of us that true justice demands patience, clarity, and the willingness to see past our own instincts. The collapse of that trial didn't bring closure. It opened a conversation, one that Fairmont needed to have, and one that many of our communities need to have, too. Real change didn't come from a courtroom verdict. It came from citizens refusing to let the moment pass unnoticed, refusing to accept silence as a solution. And so, if there's a lesson we can take from this story, it's this: justice isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. It's in how we teach our children, how we listen to strangers, how we react in fear. It's in how we decide to see each other, not as threats, but as human beings worthy of dignity, patience, and understanding. As we leave today's story behind, I invite you to carry its weight with you. Let it be a mirror you're not afraid to face. Let it be a call to choose justice not just when the cameras are watching, but every day, and every quiet moment that asks, will I see the person in front of me for who they are, or for who my fear tells me they might be? Thank you for listening, for caring, and for choosing to be part of a community that believes stories like this matter. If today's story moved you, please consider sharing it, And don't forget to subscribe to US Instructive Stories for more powerful true stories that shine a light on the choices that shape our world. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep choosing to see the humanity in each other.